And we're live, Warden Danielson.
Good morning, everyone. If you would take a roll call, please.
Warden Danielson.
Present.
Councillor Moffat.
Present.
Councillor Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Kennedy.
Present.
Councillor Burton.
Present.
Councillor Ryle.
Present.
Councillor DeVolen.
Present.
And Councillor Shell.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we begin, we respectfully acknowledge that the County of Haliburton is located on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which are Curve Lake, Rama, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Beausoleil, and Georgina Islands First Nations. We acknowledge the shared presence of Indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original Indigenous inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda for today? Councillors DeVolen and Burton.
By Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Burton, be it resolved that the February 9th, 2022 Haliburton County Committee of the Whole agenda be approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof this morning? Hearing none, we'll move into delegations. Our first delegation is from the Poverty Reduction Roundtable. And with us this morning is Marina Hodgson, who's the chair of the roundtable, and Kelly Jones, who is the coordinator.
Hello.
Good morning, ladies.
Hear me and see me okay?
Yep, if you could turn up your volume just a little bit.
Sure. There we go. That's better.
That's great, thanks. So good morning to you both, and we look forward to hearing your update.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Warden and Council members, for having us here today. So my name is Kelly Jones, and I am the new Ending Poverty Roundtable Coordinator for the City of Kawartha Lakes and Haliburton County. I am very honored to use my lived experience in the community that I currently reside in, but bringing it to this region as well. I've introduced a lot of poverty reduction programming, so it's been so wonderful to meet everyone and continue with this work here. So as you know, the Poverty Reduction Roundtable is composed of community members, inclusive of the nonprofit and business sectors, government, and the broader public services, faith community, and interested residents with an interest in reducing poverty and utilizing lived experience of the individuals that habitat in the community. So collectively, we work to raise awareness and share information, providing educational events, foster collaboration between various communities, stakeholders to develop poverty reduction initiatives, and advocate for policies, programming, and services that will address the root cause of poverty. So knowing that 18.4% of our community members between the ages of 18 to 64 are living in poverty, and 12.8% of our seniors live in poverty. And also recognizing that 49.5% of our community members are paying above the government threshold in rent, which is 30%. There are 2,153 families and individuals on the housing wait list. So I personally can share what it is like living in housing as I currently do now. And the dilemma for me is I don't make enough rent money to afford outside of subsidized housing, but then I'm also past the threshold for subsidy. So I only pay market value. If I had to pay what is out there, I would be using all of the resources all over again, even though I work 40 hours a week doing the job that I do. So if we have ways to focus on alleviating the housing costs through different avenues, the percentage of people having to rely on food banks and worrying about paying their bills or having access to a vehicle to get to the better paying jobs would be diminished. So The poverty reduction strategy contains 5 action plans that target different areas that play a role in poverty reduction in the city of Kawartha Lakes and county of Haliburton. So these 5 action plans are closely interrelated, as a disruption to any one of them would affect the other. As we all have endured this pandemic, we also have recognized the impact and increased barriers our community members have come across, inclusive of the agencies and organizations that are trying to alleviate these barriers. In recognition of this, we've started off the new year with updating the working group action plans to ensure that we are getting to the root of the barriers. Currently, given the state that we're in after enduring all of this, we've looked at the action plans, and they are the food security. So it has actually finished a working action plan and is starting to be actively motivated for change. So with the assistance from the Kawartha Lakes Food Coalition and various food banks within the community, we've updated it and it has been approved unanimously through the roundtable. The recommendations that they've been focusing on, or we will be focusing on, are advocating to the federal and provincial government to develop policies and programs that take a comprehensive approach to address root causes of poverty and food insecurity, advocate in partnership with organizations and local groups for programs and policies that promote equity, such as adequate and accessible income-based supports, safe and decent employment that protect employees and provide fair wages and pay and benefits, and safe and affordable housing, and accessible and quality childcare and transportation. Another recommendation is supporting initiatives that develop a just and sustainable food system, and supporting food literacy initiatives and programs that will increase access to healthy, sustainable, and safe foods. Our second working action plan is education and employment. Having just had a meeting with them, my very first one with them, we have created a relevance to updating the policies for this, for the roundtable. So we understand that just saying go get a job is not the way to alleviate an individual in poverty, that it is a systemic change. So things like living wage, so the working action group will be focusing on ways to allow more employers to have a living wage, and if not, benefits to assist in a living wage mentality, and working to support other employers and educating them to what that living wage would look like and the successes that it would entail. Looking to programs like Circles or Make Your Way or Getting Ahead that will offer a rounded support for those seeking higher education and employment. The third action plan is children and youth. Currently, a big focus is on recruiting early childhood educators and enticing them to be a part of the daycare solution. We also know that $10 a day government approved childcare for families will alleviate a big portion of cost for hardworking families and single parents. Fourth is our housing. While we know the detriment that housing has affected our local communities, the 10-year government housing plan is in place. We're looking at more local aspects to this. We can celebrate the fact that more government subsidies have been handed out to offer those faced with a homelessness crisis, but we do need more housing in general, the stock. Looking at ways to generate a rent cap or offering landlords a tax break for offering affordable housing are just some ways that could contribute to this. These are just some of the ideas that we've been looking at a local level. And as well, we will be looking at easy wins for refreshing our housing action plan. And for transportation, considering that transportation is something that the municipalities are currently working on, we've opted to be a part of the contribution when asked or needed, as we can continue putting our best foot forward in the other action groups. If the municipality has updated their system in regards to transportation, or if any meetings were being held, I myself, as the roundtable coordinator, could be included in these meetings to communicate to the roundtable of the next steps. So I'm very passionate about programs such as Circles and Make Your Way or Getting Ahead and Bridges Out of Poverty, and understanding that one individual needs 11 resources, that you or I need 11 resources in order to succeed. And we're looking at these 5 resources within our community, but you can tell that there are the 11 resources intermingled into this. So let's collaborate together and have a more lived experience at the table using their voices to help make the big decisions that affect them. So I hope that wasn't rushed, but I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Do any members of council have any questions or comments they'd like to make? And Marina, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I was just here because Kelly is rather new in her position. So I want to make sure if there's questions sort of on the background that I was here to support her, but she did a great job. So.
Councillor DeVolen.
Yeah, just thank you, Kelly and Marina, for being here today. Obviously, you reporting with both in report form and with us here virtually today, and hopefully in the future in person, you know, explaining all the things that go on to the balance of county council, just not myself. Sometimes, you know, I'm sure they would get tired of my version of reality, and it's wonderful to have you here and hope to see you at county council in this form many times as we go forward.
Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kelly. You did a great job, great presentation. It wasn't rushed, very organized. I'm going to assume some of your statistics are taken from, you know, probably some years back, as Stats Bureau was a little bit behind, and I have grave concerns that those numbers and things that you quoted are not accurate for what the current situation is. Well, we all buy groceries, right? We all eat. It's just shocking how quickly and how fast the price of food is going up. Plus, I'm not sure in terms of the housing stock is also seems to just be diminishing quicker than ever due to the price of real estate going off the charts. So, you know, the work you guys are doing is so important and much appreciated. And I really appreciate you coming to council and doing that presentation. But it's sort of like the snapshot that you posed. My gut says it's actually kind of worse than what your stats are really saying.
I can share that I just received the stats just a couple of days ago. So we know that the current stats will be updated within this next, the spring. And yes, it is far worse, but that is still worse, the stats that I shared with you. So hopefully with the work and collaborating with you all and our communities that we can get those stats better, make them better.
Any other comments or questions? Well, I'd like to thank you both. I know this is a challenging job that you're doing, and we sure appreciate your giving us an update. Well done to you both. If I could have a mover and a seconder to accept this report. Councillor Roberts and Shell.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole receives for information the Poverty Reduction Roundtable update from Kelly Jones, Ending Poverty Coordinator.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, next up we have Oscar Poloni from KPMG, who's going to give us an analysis of reserve and reserve funds. Just a comment that this is a little bit overdue. Oscar was planning to come and see us last year, but with the changeover in Treasury staff, it kind of got shuffled a little bit. So never too late to get some good advice about reserves. So welcome, Oscar.
Well, thank you, Warden Danielson, and good morning, members of County Council. The intention of our presentation today is to follow up on a discussion that we had when we presented the financial statements for the county to talk about reserve and reserve funds. And one of the things that we often get asked when we go in front of a municipality is, what is the right amount of reserves? Do you have enough? Do you have too many? What should you be using for? So more than anything else, what this is really intended to do is to provide some perspective to county council, give you some sense as to what you have in reserves, how you fare compared to other municipalities, and some other suggestions, if you will, concerning potential courses of action that the county can take as part of your financial planning and budgeting. I do want to make it very clear, council, that it is not our position to dictate policy to our clients, and this very much falls within the mandate of council in terms of where you want to go. And there's a number of different pieces here. So this is more perspective and suggestions than anything else, recognizing that council ultimately calls the shots. So one of the things that we did do is we provided a bit of a 10-year perspective in the slide deck concerning where your reserve balances have moved. And at the end of 2020, being the most recent set of financial statements that we have, the 2021 audit is set to start in a few weeks, your reserve balances were roughly $6.8 million. Now, your reserves are divided into a couple of different buckets. For the purposes of the presentation, we've divided them between what we consider to be a working fund reserve, which really is, at least in a traditional definition, a contingency for operating purposes. So it is money that is available to you specifically to help with unforeseen expenses, revenue losses, what have you. And that comes in at just under $2 million at the end of 2020. What you can see is other reserves that are assigned for specific purposes and specific services make up the balance of the reserves. It gets you to roughly $4 million in total. So that's 6.8. What you can see, council, is it actually forms a bit of a curve. And the reason for the significant increase in 2020 is due in part to some of the provincial funding that has come out with respect to the Municipal Modernization Fund, where there was a significant inflow of funding in 2019, and also the Safe Restart Program. The round one Safe Restart Program, the province was very clear. If you didn't spend it, you didn't have to pay it back, but it did have to go into reserves. So recognizing that a lot of that increase is being driven by provincial agreements and provincial funding programs, the question is what's the right level, and is what you have in 2019 and 2020 actually indicative? What we've also recognized is not only have your reserve balances changed over the last 10 years, but the size of the county's operation and the size of the county's budget has changed. So to give you some perspective as to the relationship between what you have in reserves and the size of your spend, both in terms of operating and capital, we've put this analysis together. And what you can see is that on a basis of how much you spend, how much you have in reserves, that percentage has actually declined over the last 10 years. So what this means is that while your reserve balances have changed, your budget has actually grown at a higher rate than your reserve balances have. So if you think about your reserves as a contingency, as funding for future operations, future capital, what this means is in terms of what you're spending, your savings and your reserve balances, your capacity has actually gone down as a percentage of total spend. The other thing that we did in order to provide some perspective is we looked at other county governments to get some sense as to what they have in reserves compared to Haliburton County. So what we looked at is we looked at counties with 50,000 or fewer households. And so including Haliburton, there's 18 in the mix. We've excluded anything over 50,000 fewer households because what we often find is that large communities compared to small communities often have a bad comparison. So places like Simcoe County, places like Essex County, we've taken them out of the mix because quite frankly, the size differential was too big. And we appreciate, council, that there is no perfect comparator for Haliburton. Every community, every municipality is different. So at the end of the day, we can appreciate that there's always going to be problems in terms of trying to form these comparisons, but we wanted to give you comparison nonetheless. And in terms of looking at the analysis, what we did was we compared your reserve and reserve balances in absolute terms. So in 2020, the county had $6.8 million in reserves, which is actually the lowest value of reserves for the 18 counties that were included in the analysis. The average was actually close to $51 million. We looked at reserves and reserve funds per household. Your reserves and reserve funds per household, $321 per household, compared to an average of $1,500. And I will say, council, based on my experience in Ontario, the average for smaller municipalities tends to be somewhere between $1,300 to $1,500 per household. And so what this means is you actually have the lowest balance of reserves and reserve funds on a per household basis. In terms of your reserve balances as a percentage of expenditures, you currently have in 2020, 25 cents in reserves and reserve funds for every dollar that you spend for operating and capital purposes. It's the third lowest of the comparator group. So what you can see is that you are coming in a bit low in comparison to other municipalities. And then the other thing we looked at is your reserves and reserve funds as a percentage of your tangible capital asset costs. Because oftentimes what municipalities will do is they will use reserves and reserve funds to fund capital as opposed to operating. So we thought it might be an interesting benchmark. What you'll find is that you're 17th out of 18. So you're the second lowest in the comparator group as well. So what the analysis would suggest, council, and once again, this is just what the numbers present, is that your reserve balances have come up in absolute terms, but as a percentage of your budget has actually come down. And in comparison to other county governments, you actually have lower levels of reserves by a number of different models. Now, ultimately, council, and we put this in on purpose, it would be very easy for you to go out and say, we're going to raise $5 million in taxes to be able to get our reserve balances up. But we appreciate that affordability is a concern. So when you look at reserve and reserve fund policy, and I know this is self-evident, you need to balance affordability against your financial requirements. And particularly what we find is this is very important in communities that have a high percentage of seasonal residents, because what you'll find is from an ability to pay perspective, there's actually a disconnect between people who have the $4 million houses on the lake and come up from Toronto and pay property taxes versus the people who live in the community on a full-time basis. And I will say, council, the irony of standing here and talking about affordability after somebody talked about homelessness isn't lost on me from that perspective. And this is where the challenge comes into play. We do note, council, that when we look at your upper tier tax rate in comparison to other counties in the province of Ontario, it is the second lowest. Some people would suggest to you that that tells you that there's actually tax room to be able to move up. But once again, you can't just look at tax rate as a measure of affordability. There's issues around income that need to be considered, ability to pay, distribution of the tax levy, residential versus commercial burden, all of that stuff that needs to go into the mix. So what we have, council, is we have an analysis that would suggest to you that your reserves in comparison to your peer, in comparison to your budget, are generally on the lower end of the range. Obviously, the answer would be to go out, get money, fix it up, but that is not something that is, quite frankly, a viable approach. So one of the things that we have seen other municipalities do in terms of trying to look at the reserves is first try to figure out what you actually need and what you can do from an affordability perspective. And this comes down to the context of a long-term financial plan, where you look at a 10-year model, say, to say, if we want to get our reserves up to this level, what does it mean from a tax perspective? How do we balance other cost pressures? Because as one of the councillors mentioned about inflation, your costs are going up. I presented financial statements at a municipality yesterday where their insurance costs went from $73,000 to $93,000, $20,000 increase in 1 year. The price of gas in my hometown is $1.71 a liter. So there's all sorts of pressures that are going to be hitting you from an operating perspective. You have capital needs that are required. The regulations are coming into play. So reserves have to compete with all of those demands. What we often find is that a long-term financial plan will help council figure out what you can and cannot do and look at the opportunity to phase things in. We do suggest, council, that good paper makes good business. So what would be helpful is a reserve and a reserve fund policy that speaks specifically about the types of reserves that you want to establish and what their uses are, talks about the concept of minimum and maximum balances, where you can set these ranges that not only say we need to get our reserves up to this level, but if we get to this level, we stop putting money into the reserves because we've decided we have enough. And also look at policies with respect to financing and reporting. We often say what gets measured gets managed. And so because of that, in a policy, it would be helpful to have staff repeatedly come back to council, part of budgeting, part of financial reporting, to say, council, this is what you told us you wanted from a policy perspective. This is the level of adherence. The third point that we wanted to suggest to you, and it's a conversation we had with a municipality yesterday, was about alternative approaches to financing. So oftentimes what municipalities will do is when they look at how they fund projects, when they look at how they fund operations, they generally go to the tax levy. There are different approaches that you can take with respect to debt, for example. So this is the question about how much debt do we use? When do we use it? Is it appropriate? And how does that alleviate the pressure on our reserve balances? Because our experience have demonstrated that the municipalities with the highest reserve balances are the ones that adopt what we call pay as you go, where you basically build up your reserves and you self-finance. Municipalities that have a tendency to use a mix of debt generally need less in reserves because they go to the market. You could look at the concept of development charges. So a municipality that I had a conversation with yesterday doesn't have development charges, but is talking about introducing them because they're saying there's all of this growth that's happening in the community. Why don't we use them to pay for the infrastructure pressures that they're creating? You could also look at the concept of a special levy as well. And this is very similar to what some municipalities have adopted as a capital levy. It's a percent on your municipal levy specifically intended to fund reserves. So it's dedicated exclusively to that. It's transitory in nature. It's only intended to get your reserves up to a balance, at which case it stops. So council, once again, intended to provide perspective. Where you go with this very much rests with the municipalities. We just wanted to provide some insight, and we wanted to provide some suggestions as to things you may wish to consider, not only as part of your future budgeting process, but longer term financial planning as well. I do hope you have found this presentation helpful. We hope we've provided some perspective. That said, if there are any questions, more than happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Oscar. I know that we've done a lot of work to put ourselves on an appropriate path to sustainability, but it's quite obvious from your numbers that we've got a way to go. I welcome your suggestion about a reserve fund policy, and it's becoming more and more apparent that to me that we really do need to investigate or take a deeper dive into development charges and see how that will support our moving forward. I look for questions or comments. I think I saw Councillor Kennedy's hand up, then Councillor DeVolen.
Thank you for that presentation this morning. Eye-opening for sure. One thing that I was wondering, other municipalities or counties, what percentage of commercial and industrial makes up their tax base? We're at about 95, 96, just personal. Very, very little industrial, commercial base to help augment our reserve or our operating costs. And just if that has an influence. And also Haliburton County, as well as other ones, have experienced, back to the future, but we've jumped 7 years into the future with what's happening here, and expansion of staffing levels, nonstop hiring of consultants to figure out where we're going with this monster that we're on the ride with, are all contributing to this. And I like what you're saying here about the special levies and development charges. I think it's something we need to look at. But just a comment on that industrial tax, I guess, to start with. Thanks.
Through you, Warden Danielson, the issue of residential versus commercial, Councillor Kennedy is a very good point. What I would suggest to you is at 95, 96%, and I'll take your numbers. I don't have your assessment handy. You would traditionally be at the upper end of the range. Now, what you will often find is most of municipalities are generally somewhere around 80 to 90% to begin with from a residential perspective. So it is an issue. What's probably more important, and it does feed into the conversation around seasonal versus full-time residents and where your assessment have, what you will likely find, council, is you've got some taxpayers that pay a very high bill and then some taxpayers that pay a very low bill. As part of the affordability discussion and as part of that long-term financial planning, what would be helpful to do is to see how a tax levy would actually fall. Because oftentimes what you will find is if your assessment is heavily weighted towards seasonal property owners, 4% levy increase, and this is hypothetically speaking, what you may find is for some taxpayers may turn out to be $100 a year. So it's a little more involved than that. I do understand your point, and I think it's a valid point to understand. If you are going to go out and raise taxes, how do those fall on the taxpayers and how does that combine with affordability? One of the other things, and there was a comment in the earlier presentation about the recency of the data. Typically, when you look at income, you go to Statistics Canada. The challenge with Statistics Canada is the census data is 7 years old. It's a good time to do this because once that data refreshes, you'll actually have a bit more current information with respect to income. It's a valid point, Councillor Kennedy, and it's something that I agree with you. You would need to look at as part of your affordability deliberations.
Councillor DeVolen.
A couple things. Thanks for all the good information, Oscar. And just to further your comment there from Statistics Canada, the delayed and deferred, we can't forget that impact, the gap between their values that they use today and the market is the chasm so wide now that they become somewhat irrelevant, and that hopefully will offer up some relief as long as they don't phase it in over 30 years type of thing. Yeah. Being a bit facetious, but not much. A question actually I'm going to buttonhole Mike. If council had an appetite to create a formal reserve and reserve fund policy, is there a likelihood that could be done in a time that this council could do a bit of spade work on it so that the next term of council would at least have that framework set to work on and make decisions on next year's budget? And obviously with both from StatsCan and Impact using more current values, there's that in that shorter term, is that a bit of a dream?
Actually, no, it's actually been on the treasurer's work plan for a couple of years. So it's something that there has been some work done on already. And no, I think that's something Andrea could turn her mind to in the coming months, and we'd have something for this council to consider.
Other questions or comments for Oscar? I'd like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Roberts.
Sorry, I was a little slow to the draw there with my hand, but because my, had to formulate the question. There was a philosophy, you talked about the municipalities that fully fund themselves, put in money in the bank, buy the truck. For most things that we do that, but there's also the thought that if you're in too good of a financial position, then you don't necessarily qualify for sometimes some grants or that. So the sort of mixed approach of some financing, which we're doing in this year's budget, and we did a couple of years ago so now this year we're doing it for bridges, but so a combination of reserve and debt is probably a better mix. Would that then come out in a policy? Is that the kind of thing, maybe that's back to Mike, that would come out in a reserve fund policy?
Yeah, it would actually, but it looks like Oscar has a response.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Through you, Warden Danielson, what I would suggest, Councillor Roberts, is when you're looking at a policy development, reserves and debt go hand in hand. And the reason why they go hand in hand is for precisely the reasons that you cited. And what we would suggest is if you're going to do a reserve policy, what you actually should develop is 2 additional policies. You should establish a debt policy, and then what you should also establish is a capital financing policy. And I'll give you an example. The city of North Bay, which is located to the north of you along Highway 11, they have a capital financing policy that establishes a mandatory amount of debt financing every year. And so what they've done is they've ensconced in policy an actual capital framework, reserves plus debt. To your point, Councillor Roberts, I would suggest to you, and once again, it's up to elected officials to determine the approach. I would suggest a policy that says all reserve and no debt probably isn't the most efficient. I would suggest a policy that said all debt, no reserves. Not something you're going to want to do. It's striking the balance, and that's where the policy linkages really help. And also that's where the financial plan helps as well, because what you can then determine is you can determine what's the right amount of debt, what's the right amount of interest costs, that type of stuff. So.
Go ahead, Councillor Roberts.
Follow up. So, and if I may, it was a goal of our treasurer at Dysart to develop those policies last year. Well, guess what? COVID and staff. Yeah. Whatever, it didn't happen. It's on her radar this year as well. So, I would suggest if Andrea wants to talk to Barbara at Dysart and where she's at, the numbers, the targets could be different, but the philosophy might be similar, and it would be a good opportunity for sort of sharing. If that's possible.
And to that point, Warden Danielson, we actually have policies that we've seen elsewhere that we're happy to pass off to the county, and the county can share as appropriate. So happy to share.
Any other comments? Councillor Rael?
Yeah, it's just very interesting what you were saying between the reserve and the debt. Is there a recommended or average reserve to debt ratio that typically a municipality or county our size would fall into? Or is it specific?
Yeah, through you, Warden Danielson, nobody prescribes the amount of debt to reserve balances. What you can do is you can, once again, do the type of analysis that we've proven and said, this is what other places have done. The challenge that you have, council, is when you look sideways, you assume everybody else is right. And what I would suggest you're going to find is what I'll call soup to nuts, where you're going to get places all over. It would very much be, what do you need from your own perspectives? How do you balance affordability? What level of debt are you comfortable with? And what do you need from a capital perspective? Because ultimately, the next 10 years of your capital spend is really going to drive how much reserve and debt balance that you need. So I would suggest, I've never seen one that's prescribed. I would also say that looking sideways to other municipalities may actually have limited value, because they make their decisions based on their own. Very much when it comes to this, it's up to county council to decide where you want to go.
Well, acknowledging that it appears that we've got some work to do on policy. But we really appreciate your level of expertise that can help us guide the decisions that we make. Councillor Roberts?
Sorry, one last thing before we end this conversation is, did come up as a potential helping financial tool is the development charges. And I know Councillor Kennedy brought it up. Is this the opportunity to give direction to staff that we would like to also try to implement something like that sooner than later? Is this when we should be having that conversation, or at a further date?
Well, we did have a presentation some time ago by Charles E. White, but I would think that we would be looking for a report or some information to come back to us to start to guide that discussion about how it would work. Mr. Rutter.
If I might, we do actually have some money set aside in reserves for a development charges study that is required it's required by legislation. And so we would, as I say, we have set aside some funds for that. I believe what we thought would be the full cost of a study that included the local municipalities. But let us dust that information off, and we'll bring back a subsequent report, and council can go from there. But we certainly do have some money set aside for a study like that. And we can bring that information back in a very timely way, I think.
That's great. Okay, any other questions or comments? Once again, thank you so much, Oscar. Your expertise is valued and much appreciated.
Well, thank you very much, Warren.
If I could have a mover and a seconder to accept Oscar's report. Councillors DeVolen and Moffat.
Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole receives the reserve evaluation presentation from Oscar Poloni of KPMG.
All in favor? That's carried. Okay, next I need a mover and a seconder to accept the minutes from January 12th Committee of the Whole meeting. Councillors Shell and Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that the minutes from the January 12th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Council Committee of the Whole be adopted as circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is roads. So we have a status report and an acquisition. So we could bring in Robert. Good morning, Mr. Sutton.
Good morning, Warden. Good morning, Council. I guess starting off, we do have our initial and monthly status report. I could highlight for Council's knowledge, after the approval at Council to release tenders, we also have another one, the Drag River Bridge that said that's about to be released, has been released during the time of writing the report and Council occurring. So we have a number of tenders on the street right now. I could also highlight in the maintenance report, we did actually receive a vehicle. So we did get the 1 ton last Friday. So vehicles do arrive. And I guess that's about it for the status report. And Sill's here and I'm here if you have any questions.
Are there any questions on the status report for either Robert or Sill? Councillor Roberts.
Just a compliment for the operations, you know, no snow in December practically. I don't, and then lots and lots and lots in January, and a snow that started like late in the day. So depending on shifts and everything else like that with the county, I think did a great job keeping the roads clean there as best can be. Thanks.
Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. Staff have been working really hard, and we do have some small changes that we may be reporting back to Council. We're trying some things with different setups with employees and supervisors and working forepersons. So again, thank you for the compliment.
We look forward to hearing that. Could I have a mover and a seconder for the status report, to receive the status report? Councillors Roberts and Burton.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Burton, be it resolved that the February 2022 status reports on capital projects, operations, and road maintenance be received for information by Haliburton County Committee of the Whole.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the acquisition of a tandem truck.
Yes, thank you, Warden. Further to a meeting back in November where staff asked for pre-approval to advertise for the RFP for this piece of equipment that's included in our proposed 2022 budget. Again, timing for delivery of vehicles is a concern. So staff put out a RFP, and we have results in this report. Staff are recommending the low bid, as well as we recommend keeping with the safety feature of having an automatic transmission with the vehicle. Expected delivery date is mid to late 2023 if this is approved at this point in time. And Sill and I are here for questions, although I should thank Sill and his team. They did a lot of work getting the specs done, scoring and reviewing these various options. Thank you.
Any questions on this acquisition? Councillor DeVolen.
Just a comment, not a question. Stats Can, with their basket of good for inflation, in my mind, has always been a joke, and nothing has shown it more than both from a municipal point of view and our own personal lives. The disconnect, the notion that our inflation rate is at 4% is so far from the truth. It isn't funny, and if I recollect, we're only in this term of council, we've seen the price of this type of commodity go up $50,000. So just as we deliberate going into the future in our long-term asset management plans, I'm not saying we should disregard the basket of goods that StatsCan has for inflation, but I would say we should temper it with the real life circumstances like we're seeing today on this truck purpose.
Any other comments or questions? Could I have a mover and a seconder to recommend acquisition of this vehicle to County Council? Councillors Moffat and Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy, be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole recommends to Haliburton County Council that the contract for the supply of a tandem axle truck with dump box, material spreader, plow and wing, contract 2022-1-A, be awarded to Winslow Drawley Motors Limited for the bid amount of $326,853.48 plus applicable taxes, and that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole recommends to Haliburton County Council that a bylaw be presented to authorize an agreement with Winslow Drawley Motors Limited for the supply of a tandem axle truck with dump box, material spreader, plow and wing.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, gentlemen, for your reports and for all your good work.
Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda is EMS, and I believe that our chief is going to talk to us about call volumes.
Good morning, Warden, members of council.
Good morning, Chief Waite. If you go ahead with your report.
Thank you. We in the past, and since the pandemic, we've anticipated that we would probably see higher call volumes, being that we anticipated a higher population in the area, and certainly we have seen that as I've illustrated in the two graphs, a fairly significant increase from last year to from 2020 to 2019, and really, if we look at the actual patient carried calls is the important piece, and that is 14% increase in patient carried calls, which is fairly significant. The standbys also have increased by 13 to 14%, but that sort of coincides with the patient carried calls, because every time a truck moves to do a patient transport or a patient response or 911 response, another truck's going to move for a standby. So just very interesting to know that we kind of anticipated this, and we were correct in what we thought would happen with the increased population in the area.
Any questions? Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. We heard lots of stories about issues in the City of Toronto, obviously completely different than our area. But the fact is there was literally like traffic jams at hospitals. So ambulances get stuck in a queue because of COVID, it's taking longer for a patient to even be admitted. So the ambulance is sitting there with a patient in it, waiting, if you will. Did that type of thing ever happen here, or with the transport? Like, how did COVID affect some of that type of situation?
If I may, Warden, through you, we've been very lucky. We haven't seen, and what you're talking about is offload delay. So we haven't seen that as an issue in the local hospitals. However, when we've transported patients out of town to Ross Memorial, Peterborough Regional, we have had some significant offload delays. And we really noticed it around the Christmas time when we had some delays at Peterborough Hospital greater than 8 hours, where our trucks were stuck on offload delay. It seems to have improved over the last few weeks. I haven't heard of too significant offload delays in the 8 and 10 hour mark, but we continue to watch it. But yeah, locally it's been okay. It's when we get out of town.
Any other questions? Well, thanks for your report, Chief Waite. I know that your department has had some challenges over the last couple of years, and we sure appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
And a seconder to accept the call volume report. Councillors Rial and Roberts.
Moved by Councillor Ryle, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole receives the February 9th, 2022 Haliburton County Paramedic Service call volume report for the year 2021.
All in favor? That's carried. Next up is finance, and we have a number of reports from our Director of Corporate Services. Good morning.
Good morning, Warden and Council.
Do you want to proceed with your first report?
Sure. So our January check register totaled $2,490,856.63.
Are there any questions on the check register? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the check register? Councillor DeVolen, seconded. Councillor Shell, thank you.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole receives for information the staff report on the check register for January 2022. And further, that it be recommended to Haliburton County Council that the check register for January 2022 with checks, EFTs, and PAPs totaling $2,490,856.63 be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. And the payroll register?
We had 2 pay periods in January with net direct deposits totaling $475,404.99.
Any questions? Could I have a mover and a seconder. Councillors Moffat and Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that the Haliburton County Committee of the Whole receives for information the staff report on the payroll register for January 2022. And further, that it be recommended to Haliburton County Council that the payroll register for January 2022 with net direct deposits totaling $475,404.99 be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Okay, next is the report on insurance renewal. This is a bit of a tough one.
Yeah, both the county's main and cyber insurance policies renewed on February 1st. This year's renewal saw some minor changes, but nothing that Aon would identify as concern or issue. The majority of our changes outlined in my report were to right size our coverage for our needs to assist with the renewal costs due to the current insurance market. Our renewal did come in below our original estimated amount and has been updated in draft for the budget presented today.
Are there any questions on this report? Councillor Kennedy.
Just want to compliment you, Andrea, on the diligence you've played, you and Mike, on working hard to keep these increases to a minimum. So thank you on behalf of the people of the county.
Thank you.
Did I see your hand up, Councillor Roberts? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the insurance renewal report? Councillors Burton and Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole receives for information the staff report on the 2022 insurance renewal. And further, that it be recommended to Haliburton County Council that the report on the 2022 insurance renewal be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, and finally, your budget update.
Yes, I want to start by saying, this was not an easy report to write. Staff recognized the impact of a tax rate increase on our community, especially during the continued pandemic. At the January Committee of the Whole, staff were directed to calculate the estimated 2021 surplus to include in the 2022 budget discussions. As of January 29th, the estimated 2021 surplus was approximately $500,000. Within my report, I've provided council with a number of items to consider and/or caution while discussing if the 2021 surplus should be incorporated into the 2022 budget. For reasons outlined in my report, staff have not included any 2021 surplus amounts in draft 4 of the budget presented to you today. Draft 4 includes 3 minor updates, as I've outlined in my report, with a net increase of just over $10,000. Draft 4 is a total levy of $20,827,134, which equates to a tax rate increase of 3.22%. I'd be happy to answer any questions council may have with regards to my report.
Questions, Councillor DeVolen, then Councillor Kennedy.
Well, given Oscar's discussion that he had with us today, I would put forward that that we move that money into reserves. Which particular ones and how we do it, does the rest of council have an appetite to take that to add a $500,000 in one stroke of a pen to that with a tax rate increase that I think is definitely, given inflation below the level of inflation, is quite good. So just through you, Warden, whatever, do other members of council and you similarly have an appetite to do something like that?
I have to agree. Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate Andrea, you and Mike. Well timed on Oscar's presentation this morning. I was looking to find a 1%.
I have to let you know that that was not planned.
Anyways, I have to concur now. After 8 o'clock was different than 10 o'clock, so I have to concur with Councillor DeBolen that maybe we should look at moving the entire amount. And just one question on the good old EMS file. You're showing Torrey Hill Upstaff at $450,000 for a year, which is consistent with an extra. There's 252 in this year's in the 2022 budget because that has to be borne by the county. But you're showing a 200,000 increase in 2023. Does the province still pay 50% of the salaries, or roughly? I mean, they never did get 50, but pay half the expense. I'm just wondering why is that actually the right number? Or
no, you are correct that they would cover 50% of that. That was not included in that funding. Sorry.
Just wondered if they'd changed the game.
Mr. Rutter and then Councillor Roberts.
Councillor Kennedy's forgotten more about this than I know, so I should be really careful about my answer here. But one of the challenges we will have is the retroactivity of it. Some of that is being funded with Safe Restart money, and the province will not fund 50% of what is funded by Safe Restart. So there is a little bit of a lag in that funding for sure.
Councillor Roberts.
Yes, thanks, Warden. I just wanted to concur with Councillor DeBolen. I think I was the one that sort of brought up what the reserve or what the surplus could have been, particularly not necessarily in projects or even operations, but if there was an opportunity with any kind of staff. We did see quite some vacancies in our department heads last year, but absolutely in light of our I really don't think that the presentation from Oscar, rather, I don't think that Haliburton County wants to be the lowest. I know he said don't look to your neighbors necessarily. We should just look what's best for Haliburton County, but I don't think it's an area that we want to be at the lowest. So I would totally support the budget as presented, and where the reserves or where that surplus goes, that'll be determined later, but I would support it as it's presented draft 4.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to say that Oscar's report was certainly eye-opening, and you don't want to be at the bottom of the heap. It's indicative of we need to do some work. Other comments or questions? Okay, so I'm looking for a mover and a seconder to move this budget forward as presented to County Council. Councillors DeBolen and Rael, or Councillor Rael, did you have a question, or you're seconding? Okay. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor DeBolen, seconded by Councillor Rael. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole receives the 2022 budget update, that it be recommended to Haliburton County Council that the amendments outlined in this report be incorporated into the 2022 operating and capital budgets, and further that it be recommended to Haliburton County Council that the 2022 operating and capital budgets be adopted as presented.
All in favor? That's carried. And I just want to take a moment to particularly thank Andrea and Mike for the work that's gone into this. This particular report took a lot of time and helps us considerably, but the work is appreciated. I know it's been difficult, so thank you. Next is our IT status report. Good morning, Mr. March.
Morning, Warden Danielson and members of the committee. So before you today is my standard monthly IT status report outlining the ticket counts and project status in the IT department, as well as some key metrics. Nothing here that I feel is urgent to bring to your attention, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions should you have any.
Any questions for Mr. March? Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive his report? Councillor Shell and Moffat. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that the Haliburton County Committee of the Whole receives for information the February 9th, 2022 IT Department Status Report.
All in favor? That's carried. We don't have any reports under planning, but just for the public's information, just a reminder that our shoreline preservation meeting is now scheduled for March the 9th at 1 o'clock. And I would just ask staff to ensure that there's all kinds of notification so that everybody knows when that discussion is going to take place. Nothing under personnel. So next up would be tourism. We'll bring in our Director of Economic Development and Tourism. Morning, Scott.
Good morning, Warden and members of committee.
So first up is your marketing and communications monitoring plan.
Yeah, just a quick summary of the report is just re-engaging with a service provider that we utilized prior to the pandemic, just looking at it as a good time to re-engage with them as we begin to emerge from the pandemic and start marketing externally, both from a tourism standpoint and from an investment attraction and resident attraction standpoint. Happy to field any questions.
Are there questions about this report? Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. Yeah, if I recall, this service didn't quite pan out for us last time it was used. I'm wondering if they've changed their approach or their methodology, or if you feel that the additional services that they're offering will fill in a gap. And then my follow-up to that is it possible to see other options before jumping into something that maybe didn't work out so well for us last time?
Through you, Warden, based on our conversations with them, they've upgraded their services to how they monitor it. So they've acquired a couple other, several other organizations or businesses to expand their horizon and reach to make it more effective. And then based on our conversations with them with the additional services that they're providing, we feel it's a good opportunity to work with them. However, we are looking at it as a one-year pilot with them to ensure we don't want to get locked into anything longer than a year, so that we can evaluate it and ideally come back to council probably next fall prior to budget deliberations to provide a summary of the effectiveness of the service.
Okay, thank you.
So would you in the interim also look at other services so you've got a point of comparison?
We absolutely can do that. It was, they've approached us and it's, kind of a tight timeline, but both myself and Tracy can explore their options and come back to council if we find an alternative service at a better rate or additional provisions in there that'll be more successful.
Thank you. Councillor DeVolen, I think I saw your hand.
Well, just much of what I was going to talk about has been covered there. The other part of it is good to see a return to some normalcy, that the tourism marketing and all that, we're going to start to open things up again, whatever. So just good to see, and a new initiative from them, and with you, a new set of eyes to watch what they're doing, and the value for a dollar spent is, I'm glad to hear it.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder to accept this recommendation? Councillor DeVolen, seconder, Councillor Roberts.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole received the February 9th, 2022 report on meltwater marketing and communications monitoring, and that it be recommended to Haliburton County Council that staff be directed to enter into an agreement with Meltwater for marketing and communication monitoring services for 2022 for the fee of $10,000.
Question before we take a vote, Councillor Moffat.
My apologies if I wasn't paying attention, but did we not just ask if there was going to be some comparisons done or some other options? Did I misunderstand that?
No.
Or are we're going to sign up with Meltwater and do that? Or because you asked the question, Madam Warden, so I'm just wondering where we landed on that.
It was my understanding that we would go ahead for this year with Meltwater, but during the year, their performance would be monitored and we would look at alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. So next is a recommendation to look at a business voucher program.
Thank you, Warden. So in consultation with the team and stakeholders, a bit of a kind of outside the box approach for us, but we've looked at the destination management plan, talked with our staff about the Hike Haliburton project as an example, and trying to figure out ways to drive spending throughout the region and bring people here. So what we're really proposing right now is for committee to support us in moving forward and engaging with stakeholders about this potential project. And then us ultimately reporting back based on those findings before we moved ahead with anything. But we felt it was important that we had some level of buy-in from committee or interest from committee prior to going out and engaging and doing it the other way around. And then kind of putting committee in a tight spot on a decision. And happy to field any questions on it.
Thoughts on this recommended program? Councillor DeVolen, then Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, I'm supportive of something that's less conventional that we've tried before and talked with stakeholders. And then obviously, like you said, it's going to come back to us to see what the appetite is. You know, I think we can't continue to do the same thing in an evolving world and expect great results. So I'm always happy to consider something new and look forward to, if this is supported by the balance of council, that it comes back to us with the stakeholders and see if they have the appetite like I do for something like this.
Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, I'm going to be on the other side, a little less supportive of this kind of a concept. I was really hoping when I saw that you might be looking at a passport kind of a program where there's incentives offered by the different businesses and you tear out coupons or whatever. And I would welcome to support that. But this, I'm struggling to see the merit of this, given the amount of money you're asking for. And I need a little more explanation on it. This is only going to help a very, very small percentage of people. And already our businesses, our restaurants are already busy. Try to get a reservation here anytime now. It's already difficult. I guess I need a little more clarification or what the goals and the outcome of that's going to be, as opposed to a passport system, which I've used in a number of communities I've been in and enjoyed that, where you take a coupon out and you get, one meal free or whatever it is. But just a little different approach to just handing out money to our visitors.
I concur with Councillor Kennedy. Until I see more information about this, to me, it's like we have a no donation policy, and this almost seems like donating, and it's not going to be equally distributed. It's based on the number of businesses that want to uptake in the program. But Councillor Roberts, you've got some comments.
I guess I just needed some more, I wanted an actual example from Scott, maybe if I could. And is this like piece of paper voucher, an actual, nowadays everything is an app or seems to be electronic. So someone checks into a motel or hotel or something, and they receive can you just explain the actual detail of what this is supposed to do and accomplish? Sorry.
Not a problem, through you, Warden. So how it would work is there would be a booking window. We'll use round numbers, or we'll say it's a month. An individual can book a hotel stay, and then once that month is closed and we know how many people have booked through that window, we would go out and deliver. It would be a physical coupon to try and avoid anyone taking advantage of the program. That would be delivered, and then the guests would be given that when they checked in. And then they would have the ability to redeem that at any business in the county that chooses to participate in the program. With that being said, and further to Councillor Kennedy's point and Warden Danielson, happy to take that information into consideration, and we can look at and reevaluate the program. As I said, it's a new concept that we're proposing. So by no means is this a finished product, and we can test and share this information with our stakeholders. And really it comes down to getting a level of commitment to council before we go out and really engage stakeholders and find out what would work for them. And if committee feels a passport program might work better and might be more effective, we can definitely present that option to them as well.
Councillor Moffat and then Councillor Ryle.
Thank you. Yeah, I have some of the same concerns. I mean, I don't want to be the person that says we've done this before, but we have tried various versions of this over the past 25 years in Haliburton County. That doesn't mean we don't try something, fresh and new to match today's economy and needs. I don't, in reading under links to Council's strategic direction, under diversified destination development actionable initiatives and tactics, page 23, I'm missing the match there, because I don't see how a voucher program is developing a niche tourism product or experience. It's anyway, I'm missing the match there. And what happens if it's, at what point, what do you do if it's oversubscribed? If everyone likes it and gets on board and there's 25,000, but there's more available, do you just say, well, we don't have any more to give out? And my last question is, how do you do it? How would you identify, this is a hot topic in the community right now. How do you identify participating accommodators, and would that include people who are running short-term rentals that are not really businesses? I think that could be an extremely complicating factor. Because how do you say to somebody, well, you can't play because you're not really a business? I mean, I just think that in the current environment, I think that could be a challenge.
Through you, Warden, so to your first question, Councillor Moffat, we view it as the opportunity to kind of develop niche products and niche tourism in the shoulder season, and utilize this as a way to be more effective with products or programs during those seasons. So outside of the summer, when we're trying to drive additional visitation and additional spending within the community. And your second question, if you can just clarify for me, it was subscription, right? So we would have a mechanism based on the research that we've done and communications with other areas that have done this, is that there's a tracking mechanism that we can have that once it hits a certain subscription level, we just would have to put out information that it's been subscribed to, and that look back at a later date if you want to participate. And then to your last point or last question, sorry, my apologies. When it comes to participating accommodators, we would work with all our stakeholders, so be the chambers of commerce, the BIAs, our HCBCs, ODO, and put out an open call to any accommodator. The conversation around short-term rentals, I think for the time being, we would limit it strictly to roofed accommodation. So it'd be hotels, motels, and resorts. In the future, perhaps based on what comes of, if council ever wanted to do this, based on what comes of the short-term rental program and bylaw that the consultant's looking at, maybe that's something we revisit in the future about those accommodators having the ability to participate.
I'll go to Councillor Moffat and then Councillor Royale.
Thank you for jumping in front of Cease there. So my follow-up question would be, Scott, when you mentioned who you'd consult with, you didn't mention the Tourism Advisory Committee. So I think Halitac, that's their purpose, is to be that sounding board. So perhaps we could check with them as well, see what they think.
Yeah, and if I just to follow up there, Warden, that's essentially probably the first group we would go visit and say, here's the concept that we're looking at. Does this work for the people in this room? Is it going to be impactful? If they support it or they provide input, then we would bring that back to committee. If they're not supportive and says this doesn't work for us, then we bring that back to committee as well. And I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Royale, then Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, I'm not exactly totally sold on the voucher part. I think I agree more with what Councillor Kennedy was saying. But then there's the other problem too. If you issue a $25 voucher and someone spends $20, now you got a problem of what do you do with the $5 that's differential? Do they lose it? And if so, fine. How do you track that? Is the vendor going to give the person the $5 differential? And if not, then they've got a $25 voucher that they can turn in. Do they back that up with the receipt to indicate that only $20 was spent? I'm looking at the administration of this thing and I'm wondering how much it's going to cost.
if I may, Warren, to follow up on that. So it would only be for the value of the voucher. So if they purchase something for $20 and they have a $25 voucher, the reimbursement would only be for the value of the actual purchase. And if there's $2 or $3 left over, then that's the way it works. But we wouldn't be reimbursing for the whole $25 and basically giving them an additional couple bucks that they didn't spend.
Councillor Roberts, then Councillor Moffat.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I'm not trying to slam the first, a first idea you present to council and say, oh, getting a lot of feedback on this. But one of the things that strikes me when I look at this is it's really only targeted to people who are coming from far enough away that they need to, as I say, put a head in a bed, so that distance. Whereas we learned a little while ago that tourism can be as far away as, an hour and 15 minutes. I know I'm not able to ski this winter, but certainly Sir Sam's Ski and Bike, they attract people from an hour and a half away that come up for that time. So there's that sort of local tourism aspect of it, so that you're not necessarily traveling from afar. And I think we're missing that opportunity with a program like this that only targets people that have stayed in accommodators. Whereas trying to do some kind of a voucher program that is for either anyone or everyone might be something that I'd be a little bit more supportive of, so that it isn't necessarily capturing people that have to stay in a place, but people who are coming to the area to go to a restaurant, and they might have only driven an hour and a half. So I don't know what other councillors think about that, or if Scott wants to comment on that thought.
If I may, through you, Warden, we base the hotel stay on basically the research and information that's consistently out there is people spend more money when they stay in a hotel. That's how it's not the only way that you can drive expenditures in the economy when it comes to tourism, but it's predominantly when someone stays over for an evening, they're going to spend more money in whatever community or county that they're in, as opposed to coming for a day. If committee wants to look at something that isn't tied to an overnight stay, we're happy to do that and get some direction there. As I said, it's a different concept for us to look at, and happy to receive any feedback from committee on the direction they want us to go. And then we can take that to our stakeholders and see what works for them. Just really at the end of this report, it's just kind of getting some level of commitment from committee that they want us to explore this in more detail, and are principally in support of spending money on.
Councillor Moffat, then Councillor Shell.
Thank you. And similarly to Councillor Roberts, I feel not trying to be, be mean or anything. I'm wondering about the logistics, and I know that this is just, the initial idea. So guests book a minimum of 2-night stay. So I'm going to just use some names because they popped into my head. So somebody stays for 2 nights at Sunny Rock, and one of the participating restaurants is, the Peppermill or Rhubarb. You can't get into those restaurants for weeks in advance. So does that mean they have to go to the hot dog cart, or like how do you avoid there not being a disappointment if someone says, I'm going to go here and stay here, and I can't wait to go to this place, and then they can't get into that place because it's, as Councillor Kennedy had noted, there's a lot of places that you can't get into because of the challenges we've had with limited hours and times and whatnot. So I just wouldn't want it to be anyway. So how would you? Is that something that you could look into, like the logistical application of the program and bring that back? Because that's my concern.
Yeah, so that would be on the list of questions we'd be asking our stakeholders, right? Is how would you manage this? Obviously, we would leave a redemption window so people can book within a month, but then they might be able to, the stay might not be for another 2 months, right? And then that's when they would receive the voucher upon their check-in. So depending on the timing of it and based on what we hear back from stakeholders, and that's a great question that we would bring up to them, is how would we manage that? And ultimately what's going to give them the most impact for their business.
Councillor Shell.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of the same concerns as what Councillor Roberts had said. And if somebody can, this is if someone can afford to come and stay for 2 nights, chances are the $25 voucher is, it's nice, but it's maybe not that big of a deal compared to, say, providing some kind of a smaller voucher or something similar to someone who's coming for just a day. They come here, they see what they like, and then they're more apt to come and do an overnight stay, at which time maybe then the whoever owns the hotel, motel, resort, whatever, could offer a discount because they've got the voucher to come back from when they'd been here for a day, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the idea, right, as it presented, but I like the idea of doing something.
Councillor Ryle.
Yeah, I think I'm sharing the same idea. And more I'm listening, the more and more I'm going with what Councillor Kennedy originally talked about with the coupon book, because now basically anybody, a seasonal person, a regular person that just lives here wants to get out once in a while, can buy a booklet, and most of them are good for a long period of time. They're good for almost a whole summer or a season. And so you can get golf, you can get a whole bunch of wonderful things that can be brought to everywhere. And there's a nominal price, and the county could contribute towards that price. Just thoughts. Is that something that you could look while you're investigating the one as an alternative, or would that muddy the water in what you're trying to do?
Through you, Warden, it wouldn't muddy the water at all. I think ultimately it's bringing these ideas and working with our stakeholders. If we want to look at something that isn't tied to an overnight stay and is more the ability to utilize it is open to everybody. There's models out there that we looked at that we could totally do that. And happy to explore those if that's the direction that we get from committee.
Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, the most successful coupon book that we've had, I think, in Haliburton County was done by Community Care for a number of years, sold out every year. And I think that's exactly what Councillor Kennedy is referring to, that model. Of course, Community Care has been folded into the health services, so it's a little bit different now, but certainly the folks who did that here then are still in the community and, could be asked about how that worked. And I agree with Councillor Shella. I want us to do something. I want us to have some sort of investment to stimulate and promote and help. I'm not convinced this is the way to do it, but I would look. I want to know what the stakeholders think. That's what I would like to know, because people who are working up to their elbows every day in the business, they might have some different ideas that might just tweak everybody's fancy a little bit more. So I look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
I'm a little bit concerned about the program being oversubscribed and how, what's the ultimate impact on our budget? How much more would we have to increase our budget if we reach a point where we run out of money? And I'm also wondering about whether or not when we go out to stakeholders, well, and to answer some of the questions that council's got, whether we can ask some questions, so sort of looking at a comparison between what you're proposing and a passport system, as Councillor Kennedy had commented on.
Through you, absolutely can do that. Again, that's what we wanted to get in front of the committee and get some feedback from this group first and foremost about their thoughts on it before we got too far. As far as over subscription, we can manage that through the booking system, where basically it caps out at whatever allotment we put at it. So if it's $25 vouchers or $50 vouchers based on your check-in, once it hits that number, and we'll use 25,000. Once it's hit that, you just can't book anymore. So it'd be capped out from that standpoint. So we wouldn't, the concerns about all of a sudden we had 150 people booked that we weren't anticipating. That's a great problem to have, but they wouldn't be able to book. And we would just have to put some language on there that the program's been subscribed to and, could be launched at a later date. But based on what I'm hearing, kind of fundamentally, there's support for a concept about supporting businesses, whether through it's a passport. I'm hearing, more clearly than a voucher program and something that's not tied to overnight stays. So that gives us some direction that we can go and work with our stakeholders and work with them on something. And if so directed, report back to committee or council at a later date in the spring.
Councillor Kennedy and then Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I think as well as the tourist accommodators, if you are looking at the passport system that's more inclusive of all the businesses, that maybe the Haliburton BIA, the Chamber of Commerce, those kinds of organizations as well should be part of your, just to see if there's buy-in. Maybe with the way things have been, there isn't a business out here wants to give 10% off or a free meal if you buy 4 or whatever. We need to test the what the market is out there before we go forward. But thank you.
Councillor Moffat and Councillor Rao.
Thank you. Traditionally, a passport system and a coupon book and a voucher system are 3 different animals requiring different resources. And I wanted to ask Scott, you were talking about in regards to the oversubscription about a booking system. What booking system? Do we have a booking system? Like what would that be? Or is that something that we would, how would that be operated? Who runs it? Who buys it? Tell me.
We, based on kind of preliminary conversations, we didn't want to get too far. We think there's something there with some of our partners at the provincial level with Odo that we could work with them. Some of the other RTOs within the province have done something very similar to this. So from that standpoint, we don't feel that we need to reinvent the wheel. And then from an administration standpoint, it really, for us, would come down to, delivering the vouchers if that's the direction we went once accommodations were booked, and then it would just be reimbursing the businesses for those purchases. But again, that would be dependent on what we hear from stakeholders and what we report back with.
Councillor Ryle, then back to Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I think now that Councillor Moffat phrased it that way, I think I'd be kind of sort of leaning towards a coupon type scenario. And again, why am I saying that? Because now you can bring in people that like the home hardwares, you can bring in Ag News in Wilberforce, you can still bring in the golf courses, you can still bring in the actual accommodators for overnight stay at the same time, because if you've got somebody that's seasonal and they got somebody coming in, they could use that. So yeah, I think there'd be more fish to be caught in a bigger pool by looking at something that would be more all-inclusive than strictly voucher. Again, only my opinion.
So I'm wondering what council's wish is. Would you like to see this come back with a little more detail before it goes out to the stakeholders, or to go to the stakeholders and then come back? Councillor Moffat.
2 things, just that the coupon book is usually meant to be a fundraiser for some entity. So when it was done before, it was community care that went out and got people to give 10% off or a free thing or a 25, whatever it was. And that was their donation to community care, and the public then bought the coupon book. So community care was the recipient of the funds. So the county can't be the recipient of the funds. That's not right. But anyway, that's just one little operational piece there. I would prefer, I think, go and ask the Haliburton Advisory Group what kind of support they think they might like from the county, and then see if we can build something around that. I mean, we can't pay their taxes. We're not going to pay their rent. We can't. There's all kinds of things we can't do. But if with the province, it's loosening of restrictions, and we're hoping that the world starts moving again. I think those folks are best positioned to tell us what something might look like that we could do, knowing full well that everybody, I say this all the time, that everybody doesn't get the kitten of their choice, but what can we do that is broadly based, appropriate, and applicable across the industry?
So are we in agreement that we leave this with Scott to go to the stakeholders and then bring something back, see where we land? I'm seeing nodding heads. So could I have a mover and a seconder? I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Redder.
If I could just kind of go over the resolution before, just to make sure that I haven't included anything or amended anything that council would be concerned with. So what I have included is the original recommendation, basically with a few changes. I've kept in the $25,000 allocation for a program. And I've only done that because it may help Tracy and Scott as they have a conversation with those groups. It would manage expectations. They would be able to know what the funding was available for the program, or what funding was available for the program. So what I've included is, be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole received the February 9th, 2022 report regarding the creation of a County of Haliburton Tourism Voucher Program, that it be recommended to Haliburton County Council that $25,000 be committed in principle funded through Safe Restart funds to support the creation of a program, that staff be directed to review alternative models such as passport programs that could be used to support businesses in the community, and further that staff be directed to engage with stakeholders to discuss program alternatives and report back to County Council.
That sound all right? Councillor Moffat.
It's a lot of words. It's a lot of words.
I'm not sure that I'm ready to see the actual commitment of the money until we get feedback.
Be it resolved, County Council supports the potential commitment of $25,000 toward an incentive program towards small business for reopening the community. I don't know, like, anyway, doesn't matter. I'll stop talking now.
So have you made a little change to the resolution, Mr. Rutter?
You want the $25,000 allocation taken out, or you want Councillor Moffat's resolution?
Sorry, I'm not sure. I was prepared to go with the original resolution. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. I know to Councillor Moffat it's too many words, but that's okay. It says what it needs to say. I definitely think we need to keep the $25,000 in. We're definitely supportive. It looked like around the table, I saw nods as well, that we want to do something, whatever it's called, passport, coupon, who knows what. But so honestly, I'll move the resolution as read. And see if there's a seconder.
Seconder, Councillor Kennedy.
I also agree that that Scott needs direction and support to go out to the stakeholders, that there is, you know, we're committed to 25 to 25,000 if the program is approved by council. He needs that reassurance that he's just not going out there and saying, well, I'm hoping that they'll support it. So I agree. It's wordy, but it does the job.
Okay, well, that's what happens when you have to change a resolution that's been made in the first place. Okay, so we'll go to a vote. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Scott. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, does council want to take a brief break, or would you like to get through the next item and then take a break before closed? Councillor Roberts, what did that mean? Break now? Councillor DeBolen?
I didn't catch what her intention.
I would like a break, but that's just me. So we'll see. I can hold.
Okay.
That's okay. We'll break until 10:45.
And we're back live, Warden Danielson.
Thank you. So the next item of business is the mandatory vaccine policy. Mr. Rutter, if you'd like to speak to this.
Thank you, Warden Danielson. I believe the draft policy that I have attached addresses all of the questions that were presented in the November council meeting. I think it incorporates all the direction I received as well. I guess the major question was the legal opinion on whether or not we could apply a policy to members of council. Council members are a different classification. So the Municipal Elections Act says that you cannot be an employee of a municipality and be a member of council. So in some ways it is very different. I guess the summary is that the policy can be applied to members of council, but the repercussions are very different. So there would be no ability or no provision in any legislation to take a seat away or to suspend a member, but you could require testing protocols, you could require attendance virtually, those kinds of things if a member of council weren't prepared to show a proof of vaccination. So I think I've incorporated everything in there. The one thing I wasn't sure, I had no specific direction from council, and I just needed clarification on was with respect to new employees and whether new employees would be required to be vaccinated as a condition of employment, or if we would allow them to be in a testing protocol as well. So I did include in the draft policy that council or that new employees would be required to be vaccinated, but and again, it would that requirement would die with the policy if in fact council chose to revoke it once the vaccine passport program was over.
I do believe that this is a fair representation of our discussion at the last meeting. That would have been my one question. I did have an inquiry about this, with respect to new employees. And, you know, the example that was given to me is, okay, so you've got two people who are applying for, you know, a high level position within the county. One's vaccinated and one isn't. The one who isn't is far more qualified than the one who is vaccinated. And are we going to not offer that job to that person? Or are we going to consider, as you're suggesting, a testing protocol for new employees? Anyway, just food for thought. I see hands, Councillor Schell, then Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you. I'm not sure if others will feel this way, but the pandemic seems to be changing daily at this point. Once again, as far as the rules go across the country, I see Saskatchewan is hoping to be without masks by the end of the month and lifting their vaccine passport policy. This document is now 3 months old and there has been a lot of changes, and I actually don't feel it's even necessary to have at this point. I could be an island in this, I'm not sure, but I just don't think it's necessary at this point in the pandemic to put this in place. And much to what you had just said, Warden Danielson, about, you know, how do we decide if somebody comes in and you've got two people that are before you applying for the same job, one's vaccinated, one isn't, but the unvaccinated person is more highly qualified. Like, it's so hard right now to get staff as it is. And I mean, most of us have our double, even triple vaxxed anyway. I don't know that it's really proving to make that much difference for the person sitting beside me as it is for myself. I had the vaccine and I had COVID just after Christmas. A family member had it at the same time who was unvaccinated and was far sicker than I was. But I don't know that me having it had any effect on her and vice versa. So just my opinion, I actually think it's overkill at this point, probably redundant, and I'm not in support of the vaccine policy, but do appreciate all the work that went into it, because obviously when we were discussing this in November and months previous, it was a larger issue. Thank you.
I don't necessarily disagree with some of the comments you're making. There has been so many changes since we were mandated to develop a policy, and I'm not sure that that's been changed. That's the problem. We've been mandated to develop a policy. And it's because of your concerns that we're having the struggles that we are having in landing in the right and fairest place. Councillor Kennedy, I think I saw your hand.
What Lisa said, basically. I think the Premier of Saskatchewan said it best: it's time to live, not survive. And I would ask, it's one of the benefits of meeting virtually is that Mike can't throw something across the room at me for all the work he's put into this draft policy, because I know that it's created a lot of angst and issues for all of us. Has there been any issues, Mike, with staffing and problems right now without a vaccine policy?
Could you be more specific, like issues?
Somebody who's not vaccinated, are they still coming to work? Are they getting rapid testing? Is there like sort of an unofficial policy, I guess?
So the ministry had required paramedics to test and enter into that. So we've been doing that. And so paramedics have been testing on a regular basis before every shift, actually. But no, other than that, we haven't had any problems I'm aware of.
That's what I was meaning, the regular staff, not the EMS side of things, but
No.
just your regular daily, roads department, that kind of thing. So if we have to have it mandated, then I would definitely get rid of that two-tier system of discrimination on new hires.
I don't know that we can get away with, I'm just not sure how we deal with the mandate for us to have a policy. Yeah. Councillor Moffat, and I think I saw Councillor DeVolen's hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've all said this before, I fully support vaccination in terms of the collective societal benefit. I think we're all on the same page there, and we all have our own opinions on the opinions of others, but that's not our conversation today. As I had said months ago when we did talk about this, I don't and can't support job losses in any way. I think that's going too far because we have options. And I think on top of that, we need to remember that we've been talking for years about the work of I'm going to get it wrong, the Wardens Caucus and the Leadership Council. And there's a province-wide workforce drought in the municipal sector. So I don't know that we have the luxury of limiting those options. And but because we do have, I'm overusing the word options, I know, but because we can continue the course of action that has been successful, it would appear, for the last 2 years, I'd be more inclined to go in that direction. We will never convince those who are currently unconvinced to do what they don't want to do. So there's no point in beating a dead horse around that. Since the province is telling us that most people are vaccinated, I support continued masking and distancing and the current operational measures. We saw a note about it today in the Public Works report, the status update about that. So, and I support the regular testing for those who are disinclined to participate in the collective good. I am undecided on the option of remote attendance because I think that could be a slippery slope. But this is not easy. We're all tired and everybody's frustrated. But as has been said, the landscape has changed continuously and continues to change. The province has introduced its rollback plan weeks ago, and I'm just not convinced that the policy, as written, is appropriate anymore.
That was a lot of words. I'm just wondering kind of where you landed with respect to this document. I'm hearing that you're agreeing that there should be no difference between in hires, that they should have the option of testing, as opposed to we will not consider hiring somebody who's not been vaccinated. But how about that? I mean, the rest of the policy, I think, has been developed in line with what I'm hearing, and also becomes redundant, under a number of circumstances. I mean, things are changing really rapidly, and I do see us adopting a policy that we will not have in place not too long from now. Councillor Roberts, I saw your hand.
Was Councillor DeVolen before me?
I'm sorry?
Was Councillor DeVolen before me?
Yes, he was.
I'll hold until after him. I just wanted you to see my hand. Thank you.
My I'm sorry was for Councillor DeVolen.
That's all right. Omicron has made a bunch of this irrelevant. Like, it's a game changer in terms of the path and where we go. It basically, it means we're going to deal with COVID much like influenza. That will be a perpetual thing. We just need to go forward thinking with that as our lens. The second part of it is, we get caught in overlying jurisdictions. There's evolving rules provincially and federally all the time. You know, in one sense, I know that it says we legally need to do this, but they're changing the rules so fast, as it's been said, within weeks, if not a month or so, will be irrelevant. My question is, play the devil's advocate, given the changing circumstances, say that we're not going to do this. But and I know this puts you in a terrible spot, Mike. What are the implications if we say no? This is far enough along. It's largely irrelevant. I don't disagree that we need to come up with a policy for infectious things like this. Like COVID is not the last one where we're going to see here. And in terms of emergency planning, do something with that kind of lens. But what'll they do to us if we don't do it, Mike?
I will have to review the requirements. My recollection, sorry, is that it is a recommendation as opposed to a direction. It is a direction in the healthcare with our paramedics, but my recollection, but it's been a while since I looked at this, is that it is a recommendation that we have a policy, but not a requirement. But I can report back. Ultimately, this would be approved at council anyway, so I can report back in 2 weeks on that.
Thank you for that. And I would be interested in, like I say, do I think in terms of emergency planning and things like this pandemic, we need to be prepared? Hopefully Councillor Kennedy, having had lots of involvement with emergency planning, would concur. And do I think we need something that looks at not just COVID, but for everything else that could come like this, and have a template for that? If it wasn't for that, I'd just say this is largely irrelevant and do nothing. But it would be wonderful by a council meeting in 2 weeks that we know legally where we stand on that, because I might be of the opinion is to do specifically something now for this one to do nothing, which may not be everybody else's view.
Thanks for asking for that clarification, because that was going to be my next question. It's unfortunate that there have been several municipalities who've been waiting on the county to land somewhere, only to do nothing in the end. Councillor Roberts, I think you were next.
Yeah, and so actually, Councillor DeVolen, it was great that he went before me, because that was the thing. If it is a requirement, then I'm totally supportive of the policy as presented, and new employees are treated just like already hired employees, so they can, if they aren't vaccinated, the testing. But if we determine in 2 weeks that it is not a requirement, just a suggestion, then it's probably a moot point. We're too far past things at this point. So I would support it as presented if it's required.
Except we will have to make a decision about how we deal.
So I did say, for my point of view, new employees, if you hire an employee, they could still fit under this policy. They wouldn't be, I think Councillor Moffat said it way back when, it's proof of vaccination or proof of negative test.
That wasn't going to be my comment. My comment was going to be, we're going to have to make a decision at some point in time when we agree that we're going to meet in person, if we're agreeing to meet with someone who's not vaccinated, because I know that there are some issues with respect to that there are differing opinions about a willingness to meet with someone who's not vaccinated. Right or wrong, it's there's all these differing opinions, and right or wrong, those feelings are there.
So adopting this policy would help support that, where they would need to be tested. That's all. And we all know that there's problems with the testing even. So I just wanted to put this to bed. I want to pass this today, but
yeah, me too. Councillor Moffat, then Councillor Schell.
I think in terms of I'd said I'm undecided on the meeting remotely, because for somebody who's unvaccinated, because I think that's a bit of a mulligan for them, notwithstanding those who have legitimate medical reasons for not being vaccinated. But I don't know that is our battle. Our battle, or our job, is to create a safe environment for our employees. So I think we need to keep our eye on that prize. And certainly the section of the Municipal Act around members of council, if a process was deliberately put in place that forced a member of council to vacate their seat, that could easily be challenged. And I don't think that's what anybody wants to do. So I go back to, in the beginning, I'd said, and it was a common phrase, your time and your dime. Well, the province took away the time and dime because the PCR tests aren't available just because. But other testing is available. And to Councillor Roberts' point, we know that we have either all experienced personally or know people who've experienced personally being sick, having tested negative. So, that's up in the air too. So at what point does a best intention become a motherhood statement to satisfy a requirement of the province? And I don't believe that municipalities were mandated to create policies. I think it was long-term care homes, congregate settings, and the like, but we can certainly get that clarification. So I think we still should put something in place that is reasonable and has viable options for as many people as possible to continue to safely participate in the work that we do.
Does this draft policy do that for you if the change is made with respect to new hires? Because we're only going to keep reviewing this so many times.
Well, that's right. I'm absolutely. I mean, we can nickel and dime this thing to death. I think that the premise of this policy may be flawed. No offense to Mr. Rutter at all. I concur with thanks for the work that he's done on this. It hasn't been easy. But if we are not required, then it becomes a decision of this group of people to just put some parameters in place that provide for a safe environment, because that's the right thing to do, as opposed to being mandated by the province. They're two very different things. I believe we need to do something. I find this policy now, 3 or 4 months later from its previous discussion, heavy-handed. And I think the others have already said that there's possibly a different outcome as long as other measures and common courtesy are implemented by those around us.
Okay, I guess the only thing that I can say at this point is if we're going to have a policy at all, we need to land somewhere. And this, I don't know how many times we're going to review this policy before, like if there needs to be changes made, I guess what I'm saying is we need to know what changes you expect. But first we need clarification about whether it's mandated that we do this or not. And Councillor Schell.
So let's just assume that it is mandated that we have to have one. The fact that we have to have a vaccine policy doesn't mean that our vaccine policy has to say that we all have to be vaccinated. It's our own individual decisions on how this should read. So I'll just give my opinion. I believe that the vaccine policy for the county townships at this point in the pandemic should say that the vaccinations are preferred, but not necessary for anybody who cannot or just refuses. But I mean, we have to still have the mask policy in place, social distancing. And when it comes to council members, perhaps at their own expense, you have to show a rapid test from that morning before the meeting happens. They're $40 each if you have to go and get one at the drugstore or at the grocery store. And maybe for staff, if it's just, say every Monday morning, or maybe that doesn't work for the roads department, but say once a week, how it has to be done. So I guess that's how I would like, at this point in the pandemic, how I would like to see it rolling out. That's my opinion.
And who do they show the proof of test to?
I would say they have to show it to the CAO or their superior. I mean, if you're on the roads department, you would, show it to the road superintendent.
There have been questions about confidentiality and, who that individual, I've always assumed that, whoever's responsible for HR.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, confidentiality goes out the window the minute that we're making people take a vaccine and asking them if they took it. So it's a double-edged sword on that.
Quite honestly, I'm not quite sure where we've landed, other than to have Mike check with the province to see if it's something that's mandated or just recommended. But as I said, if we want specific changes to the policy, we need to land somewhere. We've been talking about this for months, so we need specifics. And I can feel that there's a little bit of difference of opinion in what our expectations are. Like I'm not necessarily supportive of using the word vaccines would be preferred. Or if we're going to say that, then if you're not going to be vaccinated, that you would have to enter into some form of testing regime. But that's just me. Councillor Moffat, and then did I see Councillor Rael's hand up? Okay, Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I think, I'll say again, it's a complicated matter because of how things have evolved. So most of you know I was sick over Christmas, spent the night in hospital, got the brain tickler test. It came back negative, and I remained unwell until a couple of weeks ago and had a second round. I have had 2 doctors say, just because you tested negative doesn't mean you didn't have COVID, and I'm double vaxxed and boosted. So if we had a policy in place, and I'm happily going to show you my little thing on my phone, 2 doctors told me I probably had COVID, even though I tested negative. So we're just into crazy land. I get it. I understand it. I support vaccination, the collective benefit for the vulnerable and the aged. Like, we all support all of that, but I don't know how we can pin the tail on the donkey without it just being motherhood, because there are so many unresolved tentacles around this quickly evolving landscape. I don't want to do anybody any favors. I want to land at the place where that is the most reasonable middle ground that provides the best protection we can in this crazy and continually changing landscape. So for me, that's if you have vaccination, you provide proof. It's in the county record for meetings and whatnot. And our policy, to Lisa's point, could be that will continue to request masking, distancing, and the current operational measures that are being undertaken in public works for sharing of tools and riding in vehicles together and whatnot. I mean, they're working in Algonquin Highlands. They seem to be working other places. So if it's been working for 2 years, why would we suddenly say to people, if you don't get vaccinated, we're going to take the job from you that you've been doing successfully and safely for 2 years? Can't get my head around that.
But we're not saying that anymore.
Okay, great. So, but I can get my head around, if you're vaccinated, show your proof. If you're not, you have to distance, mask, undergo the current operational measures that are currently being undertaken by staff safely and well, as far as we understand, and regular testing for the unvaccinated. See, my big thing before was, again, your time and your dime, but that's been taken from us. So now they're saying this morning that there's going to be free rapid tests at the grocery store and the drugstore. So I support continued encouragement of vaccination and masking, distancing, and operational measures that are currently working. That's where I am at the moment.
Okay, I have heard nothing from Councillors Bruton and Royale, and I think I'm going to have to ask what everybody thinks. Comments, please, Councillor Burton.
If I may, thank you. I've been trying to keep notes here as we move along, and I got quite a scratch pad going here, but I do agree with Lisa. I also believe that we have to have something in place, exactly what, and sorry, Mike, maybe not what we put together here, but I do feel that the restrictions are going to be lifted by the time we get around to decide what we're going to do with this thing. So I'm not really ready to pass it today, but I think Warden, you'd said maybe bring it back on the 23rd.
Councillor Real.
Yeah, I have a funny feeling that, like everybody said, the horses left the paddock and now we're closing the door. So I don't know what the point of the whole thing is, but having said that, I understand that we have to do what we have to do. But I've adapted an approach now where there's been so much controversy over this, not just our particular policy, but the whole concept of it and of COVID in general, that I've now immune myself to all of that. And now I go and do what I believe is safe, and the cards fall where they lay. So if I don't feel safe somewhere, I just don't go. and there's nobody going to mandate me one way or the other to do anything different. So I'm fine with putting the policy off or whatever we choose to do, because I think, you know, within 2 or 3 weeks, if not certainly by mid to end of March, there's going to be quite a difference. And after that, it'll be the statistics that'll tell me where I'm going.
So would council be satisfied with, for now, or because we can't keep saying to Mike, we don't like the policy the way it is, without saying what it is we want precisely changed, or he'll start beating his head against the wall if he hasn't already. So I'm hearing that we need to get clarification on whether we are actually mandated to have a policy or not. And I'm also hearing that we want equality for hires to be the same as existing employees, that, you know, that if they are not vaccinated, that they're required to go into a testing regime. And that would be the only change that we'd make at this point. Otherwise, I think the policy is pretty much saying what we want. Mike, you had a comment?
Only just that one of the CAOs, the beauty of being on YouTube, one of the CAOs has emailed me and said that the policy is definitely not mandatory. So that it is a recommendation. My recollection is it was from our medical officer of health too. So, but it's not mandatory.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It went down to the medical officers of health. Councillor Moffat.
Just because we're throwing wrenches in the works every 5 feet here, in terms of what it says in the policy, it does say protecting our local community healthcare capacity. And I appreciate the intent of a statement like that, but you know, our healthcare capacity was in dire straits prior to our provincial healthcare capacity was in dire straits prior to the pandemic. And I think that the province needs to step up and do better in that regard. And while that is a piece of the greater conversation, I don't believe it's the role of Haliburton County Council to protect our local health care community in terms of the greater provincial picture. And I'm not looking for a big social media bun fight about that, but let's put the responsibility where it lies. And I think our responsibility is to protect the people who are in the employ and who are interacting with employees of the corporation of the County of Haliburton. I don't think it's our job to fix the provincial healthcare system. I think that lives at the province. We can certainly have a lot to say about that. And I know we do, and we have and will. The system was broken before the pandemic. So I just am nervous about, not nervous, I just did circle that. I don't think it's our job. That's not our job. It is, but it isn't. To be wishy-washy on that.
Okay, so the next question is, do you want to proceed with the policy or not? Okay, I see 3 shaking heads. Councillor Moffat.
I would like us to have something that indicates, clearly indicates that we understand the severity of the pandemic and we believe in certain measures, but that we cannot and will not control the folks who simply refuse to be controlled. So even the Human Rights Commission position paper on this said that we can offer options. So you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. It's the same reason for taking out from the initial draft. If you're not vaccinated, you have to, I've called it the Clockwork Orange scenario, where you're going to be made to watch an educational video. Like that's craziness. So I think I hate this phrase, but it behooves us to have something in place, because I think good governance would dictate that we do so, but that it would be more based on courtesy and a shared collective societal benefit. And I know that probably sounds namby-pamby, but we have to have something, we should have something, but not necessarily this.
Councillor Roberts.
So I'd said earlier, if it was mandated, like if we didn't have to wait 2 weeks, that's great. That's great. People are watching and CAOs are watching that we're able to confirm that. So I would have supported it if it was mandated, but there's clearly not support for it if it's not mandated. And I don't think it's fair, no offense, Councillor Moffat, to ask Mike to go back to the drawing board with it sounds like a whole new draft policy, just for us to debate it again and likely change words and not be approved. So we either approve this, even if it's not mandated, we approve the policy or recommend to council approve the policy, or we don't have one currently. I don't think it's fair and it's staff time to go back and come up with something new, completely new.
Thank you. That's my struggle right now, is that this has come back. And I mean, how much work can we ask based on us changing it every time that it comes back to us? Councillor Kennedy, then Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I would support not going forward with this at this time if we don't have to. But I also like Councillor DeVolen's comment about we need to develop a generic health and safety policy. We had one for SARS, we had one for influenza. If there's some wording that could be taken from that, and it doesn't have to happen today, that would be a more, I think, approach, because as you say, it could be COVID today, it could be the ABC next year. So if we had a more of a generic approach, which we've done in the past through health and safety policies, that might be an approach to look at. And I don't know whether any other further comments on that, but as far as this policy, if we don't have to, then I'm supportive of not doing it.
Okay, I've got 4 no's. Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I'm going to use that horrible phrase. I don't disagree. I think it's really important, to Councillor DeVolen's point, and as Councillor Kennedy just said, to have something crafted wherein, whether it's county council or the CAO can quote, pull the trigger to say, oh, something's happened. We now do. It's almost like an emergency management plan. If these criteria are met, then this is what happens. It's how emergencies are declared. Not saying that's what's going to happen. And it could cover a lot of different scenarios should they arise in the future, which they might. My only remaining question is, would we still be, we would rely then on the recommendations of public health in terms of masks and distancing and sanitizing and etc. And when those recommendations are eliminated, then we would eliminate that conduct in our buildings. That would be the outcome then? We can't just not have a policy and do nothing. Come on in, everybody just come on in. So what would we do then? Just say we're not going to have a Loctite policy, but we're going to still follow public health recommendations in terms of masking and distancing. Yes or no?
That continues to be my struggle, and why I still think that we need to have a policy in place. And I don't want to ask staff to have to go back and develop a new policy right now. I mean, over time, to develop something that works on a broader scale for health and safety, sure. But I'm still kind of hanging on to believing that we need something in place at this point. Maybe not for much longer, but and so I'm looking for a yay or nay from, I guess, Highlands East.
I'll certainly go first, Warden. I suppose at the beginning of this, when Highlands East did have the courtesy to maybe step aside from what we were doing with the policy back then, what's that been, 6 weeks? I'm sitting out here thinking that maybe possibly at the county we were going to have something in place, and all of a sudden we're here to the time, whether it's the provincial government or whether it's just things that are getting better, and I sincerely hope they are. I'm not sure what Mike has put together was what our original intent was back then. So now we are here with Dysart have a vaccine policy in place, rest of the county don't, and I do feel a little bit, I don't know what the word would be, maybe used over it, but we are here, and at this time, I think common sense would maybe dictate a little bit that with things that are changing and maybe the possible of things opening up a bit more, I'm not sure if it's worthwhile even moving forward with it.
Councillor Rael.
I don't disagree with it, because I think the whole point is that the apex of this thing, whether it's the actual COVID itself or whether it's the general opinion of how we're handling it, it's come and gone. So at the end of the day, I will go with whatever the majority decides. And it sounds like at this point in time, is to defer.
This is a yes or no, not a deferral.
Then if the majority is saying no, I will agree.
I just want to offer my sincere apologies to Mr. Rudder.
Not necessary.
Well, you know, there's been a lot of work going into this, and we're all struggling with what's the right thing to do. And it's an extremely difficult thing. And you've borne a lot of the brunt of that in trying to develop, you know, trying to figure out what it is exactly that will work for us. Councillor Moffat and then Councillor DeVolen.
With apologies, can I circle back on whether or not we are, in the absence of a policy of this nature, going to continue to rely on public health recommendations for masking and distancing, etc.? You know, if we don't have a policy, are all the plexi shields coming down? Is it just going to become a free-for-all, or is the County of Haliburton still going to say, we support this, and this? It doesn't have to be this policy. But just because you don't have a policy doesn't mean that people can just start running around in a free-for-all. So
I don't think anybody wants to do that.
I agree, but I'm not hearing any support, like, or not, for, are we going to continue to support public health recommendations in our buildings and for our people? So yes, no question.
I'm going to go to Mike first, and then Brenton and Andrea.
We do have an administrative policy that was put in place in July of 2020 that requires all of those public health guidelines to be followed by county employees and in county facilities. I don't anticipate that would change in the near future at all. And yeah, so I guess we would continue, I would propose anyway at the administrative level that we would continue to follow public health guidelines as strictly as we possibly can.
Will that work for you, Councillor Moffat? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Councillor DeVolen.
I think one of the posts of the pandemic is across the region and the province and the country, we have emergency planning. And the thing that's gone off the rails with COVID is those bodies that have an interrelationship that have spent, you know, years across their jurisdiction. And with, I forget, Councillor Kennedy will probably know off the top of his head, the acronym for the very large American one is those vessels that we built with rules and relationships that cover a lot of things have not been used with the COVID outbreak. And it's a huge shortcoming. And most of the finger wagging and conflicting things that have happened across all three jurisdictions is because we haven't taken that path. So I'll go back to my earlier conversation today is we need something that's within our emergency planning as it relates to our policies and operations that's within our plan, and that the next time that we do this, that's how we do it. I can tell you, I think with the exception of a few cities, I was the first mayor in Ontario to declare. And the reason being was I fully expected that provincial emergency management group that plugs into our local EOCs, what was going to drive the bus and carry the day. And it has not happened. And I think that we need to get our focus back on that and encourage certainly the province, and there's an election coming, that the next time something like that happens, it's not a political football. It's not driven by a very dominant part of some of those stakeholders and not the whole larger group, and that those vehicles that we built for this purpose are what is used in the future.
Warden, you were on mute.
My apologies. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. I didn't want to jump the queue, but I could see that your mouth was moving. And I'm just going to go back. This is a vaccination policy. It's got nothing to do with masks. It's got nothing to do with plexiglass or washing your hands. This came about because people weren't, it was a way to encourage people to be, at the time, double vaccinated. That's all this policy is. It's got nothing to do with anything else. Do we want a vaccination policy or don't we? It's not mandated. I suggest we just finish the conversation. There wasn't support to have a policy, and that's it. It's done.
Councillor Royale.
I think that we have two separate issues here. One is the prevention and the overall protection, and the other one is the vaccination and the testing. And I have a tendency to think, and I'm not 100% sure if Councillor DeVolen is suggesting that we put some general protocols in place for protection and stuff, which to me, I think would be the absolute right thing to do. Today is not the day. But having said that, I think we would be just irresponsible to not deal with that in some way, shape, or form, and that the vaccination and testing is a completely different issue, and that's just the way I see it. So if we're voting down the testing and the or not the testing, but the vaccination piece of it, then that's one issue by itself. It has no bearing on the remainder in my mind. I think that stuff should stay in place until we as Haliburton County determine that it's no longer necessary.
Well, you've heard Mr. Rutter say that we've got an administrative policy in place that directs, all necessary safety practices and procedures. I'm hearing a almost resounding no to what's being presented. I'm not quite sure what the resolution would say, other than that the policy not be amended at this time.
I guess I would just propose that it be the staff report be received by Haliburton County Council, and there would be no direction past that.
Will that work for everyone? Could I have a mover and a seconder to that effect? Councillors DeVolen and Shell.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that the February 9th, 2022 mandatory vaccine policy staff report be received by Haliburton Committee of the Whole. Haliburton County Committee of the Whole, sorry.
All in favor? Well, that's carried. Thank you, everyone. I know that this has been a rather difficult subject, and I appreciate all of your input and the work that's gone into trying to land somewhere that we all agree on. Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, I want to thank staff for the efforts that have gone into this, and further to Councillor DeVolen's comments, if we dusted off the 2006 pandemic plan that was developed by Emergency Management Ontario, there's a lot of stuff in that would be relevant today. So that's a report that just ended up sitting on a shelf despite thousands of hours of work that went into that. And anyways, history repeats itself.
It does. Okay, that I believe concludes our open business for the day. We'll now be moving into closed session, so we'll just give a few minutes to make the transfer over.
Warden Danielson, just before we go, I don't know that we passed a motion to go into closed session. I think you're still on mute.
My apologies. My head was so full of vaccination policy. It's just like, wow. Could I have a mover and a seconder to go into close, please? Councillor Roberts and Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Committee of the Whole enter into closed session for the following reasons: security of the property of the municipality or local board, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including a municipal or local board employee, and litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board.
All in favor? That's carried. We will now be a couple of minutes transferring over to closed.
back live, Warden Danielson.
Thank you.
Live, Warden Danielson.
Thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting? Councillor Kennedy and Rao.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that the February 9th, 2022 meeting of Haliburton County Committee of the Whole now adjourned.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks, everyone. I know we had a bit of tough sliding today, but
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care, everyone. Stay safe.
and you.